Welcome to this week's episode on the Supercoach Hub for NBL Supercoach 2023 for round 9. Big wait. So because we had a big wait, we've got a great special first-time guest on the Supercoach Hub podcast for the NBL, and that is Vern, who has... You've got your own show, Vern, so, I'll introduce you, but why don't you tell everyone about your show that you do as well for the NBL, because we don't have that much content for NBL Supercoach, or in fact even NBL in general, just because it's a growing league, and I think the interest the last couple of years has really picked up. So tell us about you. What about your show?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. But look, I just do my own YouTube channel for NBL. I do it for AFL as well, but it is just Vern's Supercoach, and you can also find me at on Twitter, just Verns_SC. But as you said, it's not a widely spread sort of industry, the NBL Supercoach. So it is pretty niche, and I'm very happy to be involved with it, and I'm very happy to be here and just be a part of that community with you.
Awesome. Good stuff, mate. Well, good to have you aboard for this week's Round 9 podcast. For those that are tuning in for the first time with me, you often find me on the NRL Supercoach All-Stars podcast. I'm the host of that one, been going for about 6 years strong. And if you want to listen to that one, tell you what, we're about a month away from starting NRL content now, which is a bit scary because NRL and NBL overlapping. It's going to be tough, but I reckon I'll make it happen. But if you want to follow me, NRL_SC_All-Stars, or you can also follow this podcast as well through the Supercoach Hub, who has all of your sports covered for Supercoach. Now, we did have a week off, Vern, which is, I think I was saying before we started recording, a bit of a welcome relief for me because I was getting a bit to the end of my rope with some of the trading and stuff, and there was a few things that didn't work out last round. I managed to go okay. I dropped about 100 spots to about 380. But I think it was one of those rounds where I started off really happy. I've kind of put in the rearview mirror now, but I captained Lamb, and that started off brilliantly, and Lamb was the best captaincy option for the round, so that was great. But I also was really big on Milton Doyle, who seemed to work out because he was on fire that first game, and in that second game he was injured. He had foul trouble and maybe a niggling injury, and he ended up scoring pretty poorly, going sub-50 between the two games, and most of those points came in the first one. So mixed bag. I also hope for Henschel to come in and actually, in a double game week, Perth might actually give him a run. That didn't happen, so that's a headache for this week. But what about you? How are you travelling heading into round 9?
Yeah, look, as you said, you enjoyed the week off. Me personally, I was a little bit bored. So as you said, stuff overlapping. I personally jumped into a lot of the BVL content because I just had nothing else to really do. So made a team for that and got a bit involved there. But look, honestly, my worst week by far. I'd had a pretty good start to the season, was traveling quite well. And it's the first time all season I'm actually outside the top 100. I went back 251 places from about 57 or so. I made the pin to captain move, and that alone just cost me so many points. And yeah, it was a devastating week. So I was also kind of happy to originally just put it behind me. And then, I'm glad to be back though. I'm ready, rejuvenated for this content.
Well, that means I'm right next to someone who was ranked in the top 50 a week ago. So that's almost top 50. So that makes me feel better. But I also traded Pinder in, and he was exceptionally disappointing, especially when you consider... I think that he was a real premium option. He was a captaincy option, as you know, and he was also someone who was really a one-week play because that at Perth don't have. I think they've got like one out of the next 7 as a double game week, and it's not coming up for ages. So
yeah, it really dries up for them.
So it didn't work out well, but at least a lot of people got Pinder in. Look, let's move along and have a bit of a chat about this round. So first of all, before we do, a bit of an injury update. Main injuries that have come up, there's obviously a few other little ones, but I think coming into this round, one of the big ones for me, I think, is that last round, McDowell White ended up hurt for the Breakers, and him being out 6 weeks, he started coming off the bench and stuff anyway, but it's just more, I guess, the ball handling and the usage and everything's got to go somewhere. And with you've obviously got Jackson Cartwright there who has been killing it already. My immediate thought was, well, someone like Cartwright and even someone like Lamb might benefit with a few extra touches or just even a few extra assists, having to handle the ball a little bit more and stuff. So that's probably a positive. I think the drawback was that McDowell White And one of our guests the last couple of weeks actually threw him out there as a bit of a real smoky pot option just to get in because he was real low in value, and that wouldn't have worked that well. But I think one of the things with McDowell White is he was just starting around into form a little bit and starting to find his feet again after some awful start to the season coming off injuries and then some awful shooting and just some bad luck. That's probably hinders the breakers a little bit too. So I initially was really positive about it, Vern, and like, oh, cool, the Supercoach relevant guys in Lamb and Cartwright were going to maybe get a few extra touches and stuff. And then I sort of backpedaled and went, hang on, Barnsey, maybe the breakers aren't very good and they could get pounded a little bit without, with somebody else out again with Cheatham still on the shelf too.
Yeah, I mean, look, breakers were very confusing this week. I mean, with McDowell White, he had been awful. He hadn't been able to score. His Supercoach points were mainly coming off assists. And then, as you mentioned, like the last few games, he started finally putting the ball in the basket. And it's like, okay, it's all starting to come together now. He's starting to look good. This is it. And then he's out injured. And it really hurts New Zealand. And New Zealand was so confusing because they come out and beat Tasmania, who we all think are a very strong team. It's very surprising. They got up, they won. It was great from them. I'm like, wow, New Zealand, maybe they're getting it together. And then they come out and play the worst game of basketball I think I've ever seen, televised, like against Illawarra. It was disgusting to watch, 60 points. Neither of them even hit 70, and they end up losing to Illawarra. And it was such a yin-yang week for them that it's a bit hard to read what exactly is going on in New Zealand.
Yeah, it was terrible because you expected them to absolutely pound Illawarra. And for all the Lamb captains that were aside from me, we were all thinking, wow, if Lamb's put that up in the first game, we might get 200 points out of him and then 400 captain because he's just going to annihilate Illawarra. And then against Illawarra, I flicked over to the stats because I just kept saying he'd miss and miss and miss. And I looked at the stats and he was 5 of 16 at that point. And I was like, wow, like this is awful. It was just there's so many misses from Lamb after he's been so efficient against a defence that you thought wouldn't have been able to handle him. Clintman also has been a thorn in the hip of many super coaches, pun intended, because he does have a lingering hip injury still. And I think the concern with this one, Vern, is that it's one that's come back, and it's different if it's a new injury, but I think that you're more concerned if it's a reoccurrence of the same injury coming back again that's cost him time before. And he's someone who I think we had high hopes for. I actually traded him out when he got hurt a couple of weeks back, and I was happy with that a couple of rounds ago. At the time, I was really worried, but then obviously he's sort of floundered. But he looks like he's touch and go as well with that hip.
Yeah, no, he's a real iffy one as well in the sense that you'd hate to bring him in, and the same thing happened last week, where he comes in, he plays his first game, and then all of a sudden it flares up again and he can't play the second game. Because that's the whole reason we want these Cairns players. We want them for the double game. That's the value where Clintman has it. And all of a sudden, if he's pulling out of the second game in the week because his hip's flaring up, it's just real dicey. And they got the extra week off at least, so you'd think that extra week, hopefully that's going to allow him to get back into his groove and be all right and, then be able to actually work on it on the week off. But it is a scary thing that it could flare up at any time.
Cummings hasn't been training at all for the Phoenix as well, so he's going to be in some doubt. Scott from Brisbane's back, and that's interesting, and we're going to talk about him in the trade market in a moment. But him coming back he was playing really well before. I was actually quite impressed with him. But in saying that, we don't know. In NBL especially, like it's a bit different in NRL because, I'm used to NRL. You see someone named on Team List Tuesday, or certainly you're into AFL, and AFL is very similar. Yep. And you see them named and they're starting and you go, well, they're sweet. Whereas in basketball, whether it's NBL or NBA, when you're playing fantasy sports, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're okay because they might end up starting and playing on a minutes restriction that sees Scott play 16 minutes or something. You never really can tell with basketball. And that's one of the concerns, I think, when you're looking at the injury reports in basketball, it really differentiates it with some of the other sports. And you see it, the NBA is notorious for doing it too. They'll actually have someone coming off the bench. I mean, in some of my NBA teams, I've got Kessler at Utah, and he's come off the bench the last couple of games, including at the moment where they're playing the New Orleans Pelicans right now. But he's playing his same minutes, so it really doesn't matter. It's harder to tell in basketball. And it's one of the things I'd be concerned about with Scott, even though it's positive injury news.
Yeah, I mean, look, whenever I think of players coming back and, how's it going to affect them? And as you mentioned, Scott could show up on the day ready to play and then just not be feeling it and end up only playing 5 minutes, sort of thing. And it makes me think of the Blitz when Jalen Adams showed up ready to play after his injury, gets a blood nose and misses half the game off a blood nose. And you just never know when, I guess, something like that's going to happen. But in Scott's case, I think you would expect him to probably come back with restricted minutes, but it's hard to tell. He could start, as you said, and then only play the first sort of 5 minutes, then maybe 5 minutes at the end of the game. Maybe he doesn't start, but he comes on and plays 20 plus minutes. You can't tell just from the starting lineups, which makes it, so scary if you want to jump on him, to sort of do that.
And Brisbane are full strength too, which I don't think helps his cause too much. Look, the trade market for this week. Obviously, everyone's had a week off. They've had a lot more extra time to play with this. We've got 4 teams on the double. Adelaide, Brisbane, Cairns, and just Cairns. Like, may as well just say Cairns every week. It's always Cairns on the double every single round. And there's one other one that I'm missing, actually. Sorry.
So New Zealand, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Cairns.
Yeah, New Zealand was one I missed. So 4 teams this week, so quite good doubles to get on top of, and especially to stream guys in even just for a week. Having a look at the trade market, though, and this is where it gets interesting. It's really at the meaty period now where teams are running out of their boosts or deciding whether they want to just bury it and just go to 0 boosts even. And there's a lot of trades that are right now are good. Like, we've got 4 doubles this week, but next week there's only 2 doubles. So it's really important to have a look at that. Plan your trades out. But trading out, Keanu Pinder. Look, I'm just going to jump on here and say he's going out of my team at the moment, and I'm looking at burning a boost just to get rid of him. I am that burned by having him. It is just a never own again type situation. I can't believe that first game how bad he was. Like, he took like 15 minutes to get his second rebound or something, and he wasn't scoring at all. He was actually really inefficient. He had a few turnovers too by halftime. He just was non-existent. They would have been better off just putting Sarr out there and just not even playing Pinder. So I thought the eye test at times this year, Pinder hasn't passed it. And then I thought a couple of weeks ago he looked really good. Maybe he's coming back now. I was pretty confident getting him in. After last week, he's come out in a double game week and scored 29 points, Vern. Some of that was a bit of foul trouble at times as well, I think. But for the season, he's at 27.3, which sounds good, but I think that's dropping. And with Perth having no double game weeks to really take advantage of going forward, at 325,000, break even at 53, he's going to be, in 2 rounds' time, probably 280,000 the way he's going. So I think you have to get rid of him.
Yeah, as you said, Perth actually come up for 3 singles in a row, so most Perth players are probably jumping off right now. As I mentioned, I had Pinder as my captain this coming round, so I watched him very closely. And as you mentioned, he just looked awful. And I get that he was playing Cairns, and you think it's a revenge game sometimes, and you think he's going to come out and he's going to fight against his old team and have a big game because of it. But at the same time, Cairns know all these tricks. They don't want him to come out and have a big game against them. They want to lock him down, shut him down, make sure he has a terrible game and regrets leaving them, sort of thing. You want to punish someone for that. Mm-hmm. So look, maybe he got focused a little bit harder in that Cairns game defensively than he probably had been previously. But even with that, as you mentioned, he's getting to the position where in the start of the season he would beat his player off the dribble, he'd get to that layup and he'd finish it. Now he's getting on the dribble and he's getting blocked a lot of the time, or he's just not hitting the shot, and he doesn't look like the same Pinder that we saw at the start of the season. And the thing that I think was frustrating for people is, I think 2 weeks ago, because I've had him for 3 weeks in a row now, 2 weeks ago when he had his double, he didn't look very good either. But then he had that 31 in round 7 on the single weeks, where he actually looked good. I think he conned a lot of people into picking him up for the doubles this week, and then just went back to looking awful again. And it's just, as you mentioned, he's a never again, which I don't know if we can really say in a format where there's not many centers to choose from, but he burnt me so hard that I don't want to ever see him in my team again.
Well, we all should have just got Will Magnay in. that's what should have happened. But, we digress. When you're looking at Bryce Cotton, he's the second guy that's getting traded out the most in trades this week. And he's someone who is coming up against Sydney this week, which I'm actually surprised that they're favourites on the bookies. I've actually put some quiet money on Sydney as underdogs, but that's their only game this week. And then they've got their double in round 12, like you said, but then their next double doesn't come until round 16. So, it's not worth having any Perth players unless they're making you money, or you can just sit them there like Sar's just going to sit there in my team and just give me his 10 points or whatever on his bench. But I think you get rid of Cotton. But having said that, it is a point in the season, and I'll give you some examples from my team where you've got enough cash where you say, look, I don't need to be cashing out stars. I'm going to keep them because 50% of a star on the bench on a single game is better than, a lot of the plebs getting the double game week. So I've got, on my bench at the moment, I've got Brown and I've got Creek, and I'm probably going to trade Brown, and I've got Doyle, but I'm probably going to keep Doyle and Creek because they're guys that I don't want to keep burning trades on to get him in and out. And I've got other guys that I can trade that are worse than them. So it's a point where you need to decide, who are your stars, who are your guns that you want to keep on the bench to score well. Have they got good upcoming single game matchups? And then you're going to have, a Tassie in the coming rounds. They're going to have the double game week coming, for instance, and someone like Doyle you're going to want back anyway. So I think that you can make the argument with those sort of guys. I just think it's a lot harder with someone like Cotton because, 1 in 7 rounds coming just isn't enough double game weeks to substantiate that value. There's probably other stars. But do you think there can be an argument, Vern, to say, look, I want Cotton all the way through, so I'm just going to hold him?
Look, there definitely can be an argument in that sense, but probably not at his price. Like, if he was 100k cheaper and he's been performing the way he was sort of thing, you'd be like, look, this man's 30 plus minimum. He's putting a lot of 40 points down. I'm happy to sit him on the bench. But to have 420k sitting there on a single, you could downgrade that to, a Jalen Adams or a Crawford or somebody that has much better double game runs, and with the extra 100k make an upgrade from somewhere else, upgrade this Clintman or something to a Doyle or something like that. It's so much money to just be holding there that, yes, you could probably argue it. I don't think it's correct if you did, though.
Yeah, I don't either. I'd like to look at both sides of the coin, and I'd get rid of him. The next 4 singles for him, Sydney this week's tough. Illawarra is a really good one, and then they have Tassie and they got United. So I don't think 3 out of the next 4 are good games for them either. And I just think that, to be honest, at the guard position, there's too many other guards as guns that I'd rather have that have got better schedules. So if you're going to, maybe in a vacuum, you might say, look, Cotton's better, Barnesy, than what Doyle is. Yeah, in a vacuum, but what if Doyle's got 2 extra games over the next 5 weeks? I'd probably take Doyle in that one. So, you've got to take into account the schedule, and I'd be getting rid of Cotton. I don't think you can hold him. Bobby Clinton is one we've spoken about already. I think this is a real contentious one, Vern. I've already traded him, so I feel like I'm a bit biased in my opinion because I decided just to jump off. To me, he was someone who was a money maker who had some really nice upside to score some points on the double game weeks for you, either on your bench or even as a starter with some favourable matchups. As a starter now, I think he's killed himself just because he's a little bit too volatile with his scoring and with his injuries, so I'm not sure that you can even do that anymore. But he's now got to break even at 47. And on his scoring, he could just keep dropping cash, especially if that hip injury continues. So I don't see much value in holding him unless maybe the only time I would is if your team is that strong that you've got so many options or big bank to use that you don't need to trade him, or maybe your team's that weak that you're like, oh, look, I've got to get rid of Henschel and somebody else that's awful, and I've got the cash to do that, then maybe you just leave him there. But he seems like a pretty easy trade out for me. And I mean, a question for you, do you think that he's going to actually come good again and start the money-making happening?
Look, it's very hard to tell. I mean, look, when we saw him and he was good, even in the coming weeks before he had this hip injury, I think he was looking towards at least 20 points a game. I would have said pretty comfortably. He did look really good. And the 47 is not out of his wheelhouse either. Like, he can easily make that break even, assuming he does play both games. But as you said, if he comes in with restricted minutes or anything like that, or he decides his hip's playing up halfway through a game and jumps off the court, it's going to lose you so much cash. And as you said, you lose the money making that he's already done. And that was the biggest reason he was in our team. I think, as you did mention, though, maybe the only argument to keep him is if you have bigger problems that you could maybe address this week. Because if Clintman does come out and play both games and he plays them both perfectly fine, as I said, he can make that break even. So it might not be the worst thing in the world, but I personally wouldn't be holding on to him.
No, I agree with you. He had a 71 in round 2, which is super impressive in a double game week, but he hasn't gone near that since. And it needs to be said too, one of the things that worries me with Cairns is if you don't have, and this is all their other players too, aside from their 2 stars, if you don't have their top 2 guys, like they've been running at the moment with lineups that have always been missing someone for most of the year. So now that they've got everybody there, you're kind of marginalised, I think, if you're a Clintman or even a Wardenberg or some of these other guys, because their stars are going to take over. And they've got two very clear stars there, and they're getting big minutes, and they're both healthy now. And that worries me for guys like Bobby Clintman too.
Yeah, well, as you said, it's one of those things where he hasn't really played with the whole team back because of that hip injury. So when he does come back, how does his minutes end up looking? It's probably not going to be as good as it was earlier in the season. Saying that, I do think he's a superstar that cans are going to run because of it. But yeah, if you take all of a sudden 5 extra minutes off his game, all of a sudden you take his scoring down an extra 5-7 points a game. Is it really worth holding him at that price? Probably not.
Yeah, Jordan Hunter's injured at the moment, so we won't go into him in too much detail. But Milton Doyle, one of my boys, got him in last week. Look, he's on a single game week, but he's got to break him to 35. He could hit that this week. He's only 318,000, so it's not like he's for me, a Brown who's at 370,000 for the Phoenix, who's an easy trade out. Milton Doyle, I'm holding. I've already said that. He's got the single this week, but it's a single against Adelaide with a 35 break even. I believe they're at home as well. They are. So that's a really good matchup for him, I think. And then you look at ahead, 10 single New Zealand, 11 single Perth, 11 double Perth and Sydney. So the two singles he's got back-to-back of Adelaide and New Zealand, they're two teams sort of towards the bottom of the NBL ladder and good matchups for him. One of those at home, he's probably not going to lose any money over that period, or at least not very much. And then you're going to hit a double game week, which, yeah, it could be easier. Perth and Sydney isn't great, but still 2 games for Milton Doyle. And I think a lot of people are going to want him then. And then the next week, he hits up Illawarra and the Phoenix in a double game week back-to-back. So those 2 back-to-back double game weeks, and the fact that he's got a good matchup against Adelaide this week, I didn't even consider selling him, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, no, I think with the Tasmanian players, if you do decide to sell them, it's not really the end of the world. Feel free to if you want to try and push an extra game in. But if you do end up holding them, you're obviously going to hold them again next week for then the double-double that comes afterwards. And just with people like Doyle, Doyle is sometimes the player that rises to the occasion. You end up in a tough matchup. It happened against United at the start of the season when they beat United, and he made a bunch of threes at the end of the game, and he honestly carried Tasmania on their back to get United's first loss of the year. And that can happen with big players. They step up sometimes for these big games. Obviously, I'm assuming the extra week off, he's going to be fine to be playing by the time he gets these double-doubles, but a tough matchup because they're a good team doesn't mean it's going to be a tough matchup for someone like Doyle because of his caliber. He will honestly step up.
Yeah, and it has to be said too, Milton Doyle I thought he looked sensational and back to his MVP early season form last round until he got curtailed a little bit. That first game, he started off amazing. Like I was like, oh, he's going to absolutely kill it. He had some foul trouble as well, so that hurt. Moving along.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, when I did my round review, I definitely recommended Doyle as one of the picks to bring in. And when he started going off, I was like, man, like I should have done that. And then, as I said, it's sometimes you have the correct play, but it just doesn't work out. You just get unlucky. Like he should have gone off, and anyone that brought him in didn't get rewarded for a good play. So it's just unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think that it will come off coming up. Saar is another one getting traded out. So we've got a lot of Perth Wildcats being traded. I feel like a broken record, so I'm going to be real short and sweet and hand over to you to give a bit more detail on this. But break even at 9, you don't need to trade him. I've said this every week, but there just doesn't seem to be any need. He's just probably he'll make money this week probably. He'll just keep plugging along, and until I'm going to lose money on Sarah, I have no one else to trade out. I just don't see any need to. But obviously, some teams will have no one else to trade out, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, no, I made the mistake a few weeks back of trading him instead of Ulbridge, and that honestly burnt me because then he came out with a big 40-point double game when he had like the 45 break even. But he has that, as you mentioned, he's got the low break even. Yes, Perth runs suck, so you'll probably move him out soonish, but it's something that you'll move him out when it's, I guess, you don't have to force him out. Like if you've got, as you said, nothing else to do, you just need that bit of extra cash. Someone that's 200K, he's sitting at a good price to make that move. So yeah, nothing that needs to be rushed out currently. You can just really move him out in due time.
And Mango, I hated as a trade-in a couple of weeks ago, despite his popularity. And down in New Zealand, I hate him even more now. So I certainly would be getting rid of him. Sam McDaniel's probably the same boat. Huck Porty, same boat. Wardenberg is probably the most interesting talking point to round out the top 10 most traded out players at the moment on Market Watch. He is someone who I think we all had pretty high expectations for. Certainly Supercoach Pleb had huge expectations for him and loved him, but he's lost another 17,000 on the weekend. Break even of 52 this week, which he's got potential to hit in a double game week, but he just hasn't been doing it. So it's a bit of a tough one. He's averaging 21.3 points per game. That's gradually been dropping after he started off really well. And he's now far removed from round 2 and 5, which those back-to-back rounds for him were 58 and 60-point rounds. And now the 3 rounds since 6 through 8, he's gone 34, 19 and 28. And as we know, there's double game weeks in there for those scores. So very disappointing. I just have to think that with their full side now, he's just not going to have as much impact, and his basketball impact is probably better than his super coach output, and that can happen with guys. So I never got on, and I'm kind of happy that I didn't. But, do you own Wardenberg, or how do you see his outlook from here on?
Yeah, no, I actually always planned on bringing him in when Kansas' run got good. I did bring him in. I started calling him Wonder Boy after round 5 when he came in for the big double and I think put 60 points down. And I was like, this is it. He does everything. He handles the ball. He gets rebounds. He shoots buckets. Like, this is our guy. And as you mentioned, it's slowly been dropping back, and that's just because these ball-hungry guards just came back into the team. McCall needs the ball in his hand. Miller is just such a good player that you want the ball in his hands. And then Armstrong's come back, and all of a sudden, all this playmaking that Wonderboy was doing has sort of disappeared. We saw him a lot at the top of the 3, getting the ball, making passes inside, and just looking really like they wanted the ball in his hand at the start, a few weeks ago. Now he's moved into a bit more of a utility center role where he's giving a lot of screens and he's really just there for rebounds and an occasional shot here and there. He's no longer touching the ball half as much as he was previously. So all of a sudden he's just completely dropped his output, and it does really suck. But honestly, for people holding him, it's like if you're putting out 30 points in one round, even though it's off a double, so only 15 points a game, that's as much as a premium player. So, you're not going to be upset with someone putting down a 30 when, yes, you could have had someone on a single who put out 20-something. You're going to be very happy with the 30 nevertheless. I think it's just disappointing considering we saw how good he was to then have dropped off to what he is now.
Yeah, and I think that's really it, isn't it? And the other thing too with him is that as a positive, there isn't very many centers that you can have. So center scarcity is an issue. So yeah. I will say a reason to not trade him out if you own him is like if you got a Pinder, I think in a double game week you'll outscore Pinder. So you could trade a Pinder, start a Wardenberg as your starting center in a 2-game week, move someone like even a Saar from a forward spot to a center backup spot on your bench, and get in a forward or even a guard through your duels. And I think that's actually a pretty astute, smart play rather than having to push yourself to buy a centre that you don't necessarily want when you've already got Wardenberg there as a backup on a 2-game week. You might be better off just getting some points upgrade somewhere else in your team than feeling obliged to have to get a centre in for Pinder, but still being able to trade Pinder through duels.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely right. I think even if Pinder was the match, Wardenberg at the end of the day, they both put out 30 points around. I mean, that's great if you're holding Pinder, but technically Pinder's sitting on 100 more K than Wardenberg. If you were to move one of the two, if they're going to match each other points-wise, you'd much rather use Pinder's 100K to get a better player elsewhere. If that means that you're able to get a McCall in your team, if you're able to get a Miller in your team, rather than bringing in someone like a Chris Smith. You'd much rather do that with that extra money. So yes, it does hurt a little bit to own Wardenberg, but I think you just tank through it. He's got the great stretch of games and you just hold him through it.
So looking at the trade-ins at the moment that are most popular, the trades that are most popular, inadvertently, most of them have Will Magnay in it. He is 203,000. Look, he has got a minus 18 break even. And as we've said on this podcast many times, in the NBL Supercoach iteration, if you've got a minus teens break even, you are gold. That is a fantastic break even. You don't see like, AFL or NRL, especially NRL, you'll get like someone with a minus 101 break even. You're never going to get that in NBL. The minus teens are great. If it's bigger than a minus teens, it's like a must have. I think minus 18 is fantastic for him. He's coming off with a huge round of 69 points, and that was just incredible. And the game that he had, I think I still remember when Magnay debuted, and I was so excited because he was this tall guy that was this elite shot blocker. He could block like 6 shots in a game easily. He'd hit the boards. He was really hard to handle, and it was just an exciting prospect. And for whatever reason, he just never got the consistency to keep building on that career, and different things happened and whatever. But now we've seen him back this season. All of a sudden, he's played round 7. He was obviously getting his feet back on the court again. Only scored the 5, but it was his first game of the year. But last round against New Zealand, to throw up 69 points in that game for that round, it's just incredible. And the fact that you can get him for $200,000, and he's a centre forward dual as well. We've already spoken about the boxes that you want to tick on this podcast to be a must-have. He's got the big break even. He's going to make you money. It's guaranteed. He could keep scoring well. He's got the back-to-back double game weeks as well in a couple of weeks where he'll still be cheap enough where his break even won't be too high, you'd hope, and you can just actually start him as a centre. So I can't see a reason not to get him in, Vern.
Yeah, look, he's currently in my team. I was watching this Tasmanian game very closely when he dropped the 50 points against New Zealand, because I went pretty wacky last week and actually brought in Marcus Lee, which might seem pretty crazy, but I thought Tasmania had a great run and it was really good for their centres. Unfortunately, it wasn't Marcus Lee that was the centre that got all that, he got all the reward for it. Magnay comes out, ends up being amazing, and really made Lee look terrible. But he was truly unbelievable. I mean, 16 minutes of game time, and he put out 50 Supercoach points. That's crazy. And as you said, with a break even like that, it's just, he's gonna make you money, as you said. And you have this double game coming up in 2 weeks' time. If you don't get on him now, what will happen is if you wait 2 weeks for his double round, he's going to go up another 50K by then. So you're going to have to fork out a lot more money to get him in if you wait, rather than just jumping on him now and get him while he's nice and cheap.
And like I alluded to, someone like Will Magnay can be a bit of an enigma, and you don't want to be paying $250,000 for him, because you pay that for him, and maybe he goes on with it this year, but maybe he also reverts back to a 12-point game and then an 8-point game, and you're in a bit of trouble. He really does rely a lot on his blocks, which he can have a lot of. I like him this week, especially that he can be on your bench. But I think I agree with you, Vern. You need to do it this week. Pretty close to a must-have trade for this week. Patrick Miller, second most traded in. I don't think we need to talk about him too much. He's a phenomenal player. I had him, and when he got hurt, I was forced into punting him, and now I've got to buy him back, which is fine. But the last 3 rounds that he's played, 68, 66, and 67-point rounds. That is quintessential gun material for NBL Supercoach, and he's obviously got all the doubles coming up, so he's a no-brainer as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's my second trade right there. They're both at the very top, the 2 guys I want. And look, just having someone that's a reliable captain every week as well. Because as you said, the points he's putting out is sensational, but the point that he's got such a good schedule as well means that if you want to just put the C on him and leave him in your team for the next 5 or so weeks, there's nothing wrong with that, because he's going to be unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah, a real easy one. His teammate is the 3rd most traded in player, and geez, he's really low owned, isn't he, McCall? Look, he's at 330,000, and he's only 2% owned at the moment. I would love to get Miller and McCall both in this week. I think 49 break even. He's not going to lose any money on that. Even if he has a quiet round, he's still going to be around that point. And it just sets you up so well with all the double game weeks. I love that he's dual. I think the 2 selling points for McCall for me are dual. Hardly anyone owns him at the moment. And even after the trades, I don't think he's going to be hugely owned anyway. So I like him. He's only averaging 22 for the year, but he actually looks healthy, ready to hit his peak performance for the NBL season. And I expect him to be pretty significantly higher than 22 points a game going forward. So I really like him as a trade-in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I found with McCall that I didn't expect is how active he is in defense. Because when we watched that Illawarra game, I think he had 5 steals. He just kept picking the pockets of Robinson and I forget the shooter on their team. God,
Harvey.
Illawarra was just that irrelevant that I just don't even know their players. Harvey, there we go. He just kept picking their pockets, and it's not only that he picks their pockets and he gets the 3 super coach points, he then runs down to a wide open layup and gets another 2 points for scoring it. So he's just been so active in defense. He just wants the ball. Like, as much as we talk about sometimes him wanting the ball so much that it's a hindrance to Cairns, he wants the ball so much, even in defense, that he is just actively getting involved. And it's honestly pretty entertaining to watch as a player. But as you said, the duel as the guard and the forward, it just makes it very nice. You're going to be able to just put him on your in your bench if you need. You can put him on the court if you need. He has a great run coming up. And as you said, if it's 22 points, considering it's a double every week, if you say 44 points to me, no premium on a single, am I going to turn around and reliably think that they're going to make that every week? So you'd feel a lot more comfortable with him on the field than most premiums on their single.
Anthony Lamb, a lot of people jumping on him, and I love Lamb, but I've had him for a while, and obviously captained him last week. And I've almost got to say to myself, is it too late? Especially after that terrible showing against Illawarra. Maybe they're on a bit of a bad run, the Breakers. 361,000. He's only going to break him to 30, so, he's going to eclipse that this week. But when you're having a look at the schedule, it's not like they've got never-ending double game weeks. This week they've got Adelaide that they're hosting, which is a really good game for them. But then travelling to play the Phoenix, I think, is a bit of a danger game as their second game. But then you go ahead and you're having a look at it for them, and look, you go in around 10 and they've got a single again. So, and that one's against Tasmania. So, do you get him in this week when he's had all these doubles already and now he's on his last double week, or do you sort of look ahead and go someone else? I love Lamb. I think he's a better option than McCall, but I'm almost leaning towards McCall being a better long-term pick because you know that he's got all the doubles coming up. And I think next week a lot of people are going to be looking at teams like Sydney and thinking they want to get a couple of Sydney guys in. So maybe the smarter decision would be to choose McCall, even though Lamb's been a better player so far.
Yeah, no, this one's a really tricky one because I think Lamb's good enough that he can be sitting there on his single games. Like, he's really shown his ceiling and whatnot. But at the end of the day, New Zealand is a 1-week rental. And how many New Zealand players do you already have? Because if you've already got 2 New Zealand players, maybe 2 Brisbane players or an Adelaide player, all of a sudden, these players have at least 2 weeks of singles coming out, and you can't trade them all out. So if you're trading him in, what's your exit strategy? And if you don't have an exit strategy, are you planning to hold him until his next double? Because, that just seems a bit dangerous to me. I do think, as you mentioned, you might have missed the boat at this time to get on Lamb. But if I guess your team's set up in a situation where you have a free 1 week sort of punt at someone, like you have nobody else on the double this week that you need to get out next week, you can bring him in and you can move him out comfortably next week, downgrade him to a Jalen Adams or something along those lines, which I think would be amazing. Then yeah, go ahead, do that. But let's be honest, there's probably not many teams that are structured like that.
Yeah, certainly not as many that are trading him in. And look, I want to be clear to everyone listening to or watching. I don't think it's a bad trade at all. I'd never talk anyone out getting Lamb in on a double game week. But it's just, I think that it all comes back down to planning a lot of the time. And you really need to look at your team, plan ahead and see what you're expecting to do next week and even the week after, because he's going to have a couple of weeks before he hits another double game round again. And you need to know whether you're planning on selling him and renting him or whether you're going to be holding him and who else you're going to sell to be able to navigate those weeks. It's a fine trade-in. I think that if I'm in the position, I might actually edge towards McCall just because I can lock that away for a bit longer. But moving along, it's an interesting week because we're starting to get some guys who, let's just say, I think at the start of the season, everyone said Adelaide's terrible. I don't want any Adelaide players in my side. And now they've got a double game week and some of us are going back on that, including me. I have looked at Jacob Wiley myself because he is a forward centre combo. He's cheap and 230,000. You can do it pretty easily. He's not very highly owned. he's got a break even to 26, but he's only been averaging just under 23 points a game, and he hasn't been. He scored 32 last week in a single game week. That was pretty solid. I like the look of him. He obviously had his issues where he was out, and also I think he only played like 5 minutes or something of one of those rounds before that. But double game week, New Zealand, Tassie, but then you're either going to have him rot on your bench or you're going to sell him so he's a rental. So bit of a hard one because you're almost buying points, I think, Vern. And I've looked at it myself. Like, do I buy points this week at centre to try and get maybe, a 45, 50-point round out of Wiley, hopefully, and then move him on next week, even though I'm not going to make much money. And it solves my centre problem this week. For a pin to trade, gives me $100,000 to invest elsewhere. So I think it definitely does make some sense, although I'm not 100% sold on what I think of Wiley either.
Yeah, no, I think in reality it's really not a bad trade. Like, as you said, he's got a nice low break even that he should be able to meet no problem. He's looked really, really good in some of these games he's played where he generally looks like a superstar. But then he's also had a few games where he just doesn't quite show up. So if you are bringing him in, obviously you're banking on him hopefully showing up and being the superstar that we've seen. And then if he does that, he's going to beat his break even. And then, you make a little bit of money, you get a good score. It's awesome. But then obviously you do fall into the problem that I mentioned before, that how many players are you trading out next week? Is he the 1 week rental that you really want? Because I think Adelaide have 3 singles after that. So he's probably someone that's coming in and then going straight back out. And I don't see many teams that are structured well enough to be able to just take a 1 week rental this week.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It is team dependent. I don't think it's a bad trade, but he's also not guaranteed big points either. He could also be disappointing. So, yeah, I understand why it's on there, though. Luke Travers, he's been traded in a fair bit. Look, he's been an absolute gun this year. 26.4 points per game. I think teams are looking ahead thinking, he's got a low break even in the teens. Decent matchup, maybe, Cairns and Brisbane for your singles. It could be worse than that. And then he's got the doubles. We're not going to go through him. We've talked about Travis a lot on this podcast. But someone like Taron Armstrong, I think, is a no-brainer as well. But Chris Smith is someone who's coming in. Brisbane have a double game week. Chris Smith is 215,000. I thought he was looking really good before he got injured. And he's only averaging 18.5 points per game, but that's not really where we see Chris Smith when he's healthy and firing. Now, he had a round 8, 38-point round. I think that one of the things that when you look at his scores, they're punctuated by inconsistency. I don't know if a lot of that's his fault. Now maybe he's healthy. He's going to be firing. He gets to play Cairns and Illawarra this round. I don't love Brisbane as a team, but they keep proving me wrong. So maybe I am wrong. Maybe they are better than what I thought, but they are now at full strength. And they do get to play Illawarra, which I really like. So I understand taking a punt on someone like Chris Smith because, look, they do have another double game week in round 12. So they've got 2 out of the next 4 that are double game weeks for Brisbane. And he's cheap enough where his break-even's low and you can probably just keep holding him. So I get it, and I've looked at it myself. But, Vern, do you think that Chris Smith is going to bust out and be a bit more consistent now and he's putting his woes behind him, or are you a little bit more hesitant?
Well, look, Shannon Scott, as we mentioned, is obviously back, and I think that's a good thing for Chris Smith. I think they've finally found the sort of blend they want with him and Selby not on the court at the same time, when one's on, the other one's off, because they're big-time shooters, and when you have 2 big-time shooters like that on the court, it's messing with each other. You need somebody to facilitate that, and having Shannon Scott back is going to really help. Norton's done a great job so far, but as you mentioned, they have the double in round 12, so it's only 2 singles that you're waiting, so it's not the worst thing if you bring him in, hold him for 2 singles, and then have him for the double in round 12, or even if you bring him in for the 1 week, get the double game on out of him, and then you can move him down to these South Melbourne, Sydney, Tasmanian players that have 2 out of the next 3 games that are doubles. That's fine too. But as you mentioned, he is a bit of a yo-yo because he relies heavily on scoring points to score Supercoach points, which I would like to say he has the most beautiful shot in anyone in the NBL. It looks absolutely amazing when he gets up and takes that shot. But yeah, it's a bit of a Chris Goulding situation where if you have a bad shooting game, you're having an awful Supercoach game. So it's a bit scary in that sense. but I do think he's hit some form, so I wouldn't tell you not to do it because he could generally come out and do what Chris Goulding's been doing recently, which is going absolutely off.
I think he'll kill Illawarra. I think he'll annihilate the Hawks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just such a good matchup for him to put up, 20-something points and hit a bunch of threes and look really good. And then you don't even have to worry too much about the other games. So I wouldn't talk anyone out of it. I think that the whole thing is value. And this is, if you don't play other forms of Supercoach, you probably don't really recognise this. If you do, you'll be saying, Barnsley, I know all about this. I play NRL and AFL. Some people don't. There's basketball fans that are just basketball fans. So for those that are, it's all about value. If you got someone at 200,000, your expectations, it doesn't really matter if they're going to put up some poor scoring because you're getting relative value to what you're paying there, and they're going to make some money for it. Now, if Chris Smith was 300,000 and he relies on scoring, like Vern said, then I'd be really worried about that. 300,000 and he has to rely on scoring. But at 200,000, I don't care what you rely on. It doesn't really matter. He's cheap enough where you can take a punt. You're going to not really end up getting punished too much. So I don't mind it. But Peter Jackson Cartwright's a really easy one, so we won't even talk about him. This has happened a few weeks in a row now, Vern, where somebody's been in the top 10 most traded out and the top 10 most traded in. Not in the same spot, though. So Sam Wardenberg is currently 10th in trades out and 10th in trades in. So there you go. I think we probably got it right on our assessment that you could go either way on him.
Yep. Definitely. But look, I do think an interesting one to talk about, and I did see this on Twitter as well, some people talking about bringing him in, but I'm sure he's probably on your list as an honourable mention, but is Trenton Flowers. Like, people that are bringing him in, I've just got to be honest, no. just don't do it. Like, yes, he has a -1 break even, which is fantastic, but we've seen him get -1 before. Like, he can meet that break even, which I can't say about a lot of players, and I just would not touch him with a 10-foot pole. No.
No, I agree with you. And look, I just think it's a wasted trade. Like, if you're going to get someone in cheap, you want to make sure that they've got opportunity or they're going to make money. And I just don't see either for him. So I don't like it. I'll throw another one out there, left field though.
Yeah.
Everyone's jumping on the double game week, guys. But teams that don't need to, like 2% of teams own McCall. So maybe you've got McCall and Miller in your side, those three people. Some people are going to have luxury trades. And one of them is next week, I mentioned, Sydney is going to be popular. Jonah Bolden has been going well. Hunter's out at the moment. Now, we don't know when Hunter's going to be back, really.
Yeah.
But Bolden's going to be more expensive next week. He's got to break even at 2. So when we're looking at, out of the box options, 7% of teams own Bolden at the moment. Pod territory, 247,000, break even at 2. He's someone that I think that you could look at early, and probably those are the luxury trades I'm looking at. If I had that luxury, which I don't, I'd be looking at guys that I might want to get next week that have a low break even over guys like Flowers, who are just so inconsistent. I don't think you can look at it.
Yeah. No, I think Bolden is an amazing trade. For anyone that's able to bring him in, I'm all for it. It was really my toss-up this week, Bolden versus Magnay. As you mentioned, though, the big question is Hunter. When does Hunter come back? Because we know Hunter affects Bolden. We know one of them usually goes off, and when one of them goes off, the other one does not perform. And look, they had that extra week off to let Hunter, I guess, get better, recover. And then the other thing is, as much as they have 2 out of the next 3 weeks of doubles, by the time the next doubles come around, if Hunter's back all of a sudden, once again, Bolden's lost a lot of value at that point. So it is a hard one in that sense. I think he is great if Hunter stays out of the team. I just don't think Hunter's going to stay out of the team for long enough for him to get quite enough value out of him being the worthy pick. But as you said, if you have a luxury trade, I think it's a brilliant luxury trade.
Yeah, I do as well. And that's probably my favourite, non-trade market trade to do is get Bolden in, just knowing the risk there with Hunter as well. Moving along, did you have any other out-of-the-box ones that weren't on Market Watch that people aren't doing that you thought might be a good look for a trade?
Look, none that specifically stand out for me. I think at the end of the day, we're looking fixture related. Outside of the obvious fixture ones that we named, I think Bolden is top tier. And yeah, I think outside of that, there's nobody else that's a real standout at this point.
Captaincy options. Who are your top three?
Sorry, I think you cut out for a second. I didn't quite catch the question.
That's okay. Captaincy options. Who's your top three for this round, Vern?
Yeah, look, it's too hard to look past the man that topped the round scoring last week. Number one's got to be Anthony Lamb. Probably did this in the wrong order. Probably should have started at 3. But I do think Miller is number 2. As you said, he's been sensational and he's had such a high floor. So I feel like it doesn't feel like you're going to get a bad score out of him. Where I think Lamb could take a bit more attention considering how good he has been previously. I think teams can't just keep letting Lamb do what Lamb does. If they do, then yes, definitely Lamb. But yeah, number 2 would be Miller. And then number 3, this might be a bit of a wild one, but I think Sobey could actually come in at number 3.
Oh, I was going to talk about Sobey.
And that's because Brisbane's matchups this week.
Yep.
He's going into Illawarra. He's going into Cairns. They're bad teams, and you're either going to get 30 points out of Sobey or you're going to get 70 points out of Sobey. So if you want to take, a real wild crack at it, I think Sobey could be that wild card.
I like it a lot. Yeah, I had Sobey on my top 3 as well. But he's definitely a wild card, and we know that the Sobey shooting can, let's say, just abandon him at times for large portions of a game. There's also one other one that you didn't mention, Peter Jackson.
The man always thinks he's on fire.
Always. Look, it's the same as DJ in Adelaide. If you miss 18 threes, just make sure you take a 19th because that might go in, and then just keep on going until they do. There is also Peter Jackson Cartwright, and I've been battling with this because I got Lamb's 91 last week as captain, which saved my round, which was fantastic. So I was really happy with that, and I'd love to just ride Lamb, but McDowell White being out, I do think that Jackson Cartwright might end up with some extra assists. And I do also really like New Zealand versus Adelaide in New Zealand. If it was in Adelaide, I wouldn't like it as much, but I really like that. I agree with you with Miller. Like his matchup in Cairns versus Brisbane's really nice, but that's also that local rivalry as well, which comes into it. And Brisbane aren't travelling that much. And that second game, Cairns, they got to go to Melbourne to hit United, and I think that can be a bit of a tougher one for them as well. So I'm actually edging towards in my team almost going Cartwright.
Well, No, I definitely get that. I think the Miller thing for me is we've seen before where Cairns ends up in a bit of a rut and Miller stepped up in those games. They've ended up down against Illawarra the first time they played them. They've ended up down against a few teams and Miller starts going, okay, I guess I have to start shooting more, and the man can shoot, so there's no problem with that. But no, I think Parker Jackson Cartwright, definitely someone on my list. But if I had to pick out of him or Lamb, I think it's hard because of the recency bias that we have towards Lamb right now. But I think I have Lamb slightly above him if I had to make a choice there, as to why I didn't add Parker Jackson Cartwright to the list.
Yeah, all really good options this week. I like all those options a lot. Aside from Sobey, who I couldn't do, but we have to talk about him. Those other 3, though.
Oh, no.
Those other 3 I really like. So I haven't chosen yet. We need to go on to the community update and have a look at how we've been going, because we didn't get to talk about round 8. So, a little bit late, but, round 8, top score, 491 for Mitch's meatheads for Mitchell. Mitchell absolutely killed it. Getting almost 500 points is huge. Overall ranks, we got someone in number 13, Toby, with Toby's troops. Giddy to play. Oscar's been going great all season. He's at 22 at the moment. Mitch's meatheads, he's 491, rocking him up to 56 in rank. And Alex Rockharden's been going all right as well. Been kept my eye on him, 115. So the Supercoach Hub NBL community's been going great. We've got 3 in the top 100, 23 in the top 1,000. And also we've got some great community questions to finish off the podcast with. So love the community questions because sometimes it's stuff that I never even think about talking about. Dragon Bill, Clintman Burger, hold or sell. I reckon that we've already hit that one up. So we might leave that, but he also asked thoughts on Smith from Brisbane and what can we expect from Magnay. We didn't really talk about. We mentioned Smith and Magnay, but we didn't really talk about how we see them going forward. I think Magnay is an absolute enigma. So I will say how I think he will go going forward. I have no idea. I just know that he's going to make money and score points. But do you see any sort of consistency and role for Magnay? As you mentioned, he only played 16 minutes for that big score as well.
Yeah, well, look, the most noticeable thing for him was honestly in the second game where they end up winning in overtime against Cairns, which, by the way, Jack McVeigh's shot was incredible for what a finish to the game.
Yeah.
But in this entire overtime and even the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, you know who was on the field? Magnay the entire time. Lee didn't come on for him. They didn't have Dang come on for him. When they want to win games, he's their guy. You know, he's their number one center that they want in this team. If it wasn't for injuries, he would have been all season. So honestly, I do think he's going to continue getting these minutes that we've seen from him. I think he's going to be pretty comfortable to, I mean, I would say probably 17 points plus a game. But I think he also has that ability, as we obviously saw in that first game, that he can go wild at moments. I don't think you're going to see 50 points again, but I do think he could definitely get close to that 30-point mark. And at his price, he's just absolute value. But yeah, they love to use him in Tasmania. They must love him.
Yeah, I think that his role will grow, and I think that he's actually going to stay on the court. So that's my gut feel on it, but he's never proved me right before, so who knows. And Smith from Brisbane, I think we spoke about. But, 1 Inch Pinch has asked us Doyle to McCall or Sarr to Magnay. But McCall actually allows him to field him over Bannon. I actually wouldn't care about playing Bannon, so 1 Inch Pinch, I wouldn't mind the fact that you can play McCall over Bannon. Like, Bannon's an okay play. I also don't like getting rid of Doyle as much either when you can get rid of Sarr to Magnay. It just seems like Sarr to Magnay sounds like that Magnay's going to be on his bench, and that's fine. And he's obviously got a starting centre. So I'd probably lean towards Sarr to Magnay just because that seems like you're keeping a gun. You can get McCall next week or something. And yeah, I'd lean there.
Yeah, look, I mean, with going Sarr to Magnay at the end of the day, it might not be too huge of a difference in points. I do think you're going to have a bit more consistency out of Magnay than you will Sarr. But one thing you definitely will make with Magnay is money. So if they're sitting on your bench, the points aren't as relevant. What is relevant is the cash they're going to make, which is something that Magnay is going to do. Where, as you said, McCall versus Bannon on field, at the end of the day, I think Bannon can match McCall, if not outscore him. So I think that's much of a muchness where you're probably definitely getting an advantage with Magnay over Sarr.
100% Vern, and you can get to keep Doyle as well, which, you know, I love doing. So, yeah, I 100% be going that. I think Magnay is very close to a must-have this week. And look, that's going to wrap up the Supercoach Hub NBL podcast for round 9. So, look, Vern, thank you very much for jumping on board. Anyone who hasn't listened to Vern, go and have a look at his YouTube channel and his YouTube show because it's fantastic and you can never get too much NBL content. So, thanks very much for jumping on board this week.
No, thank you for having me. I've had an absolute blast being here. And yeah, I've listened to you guys doing your podcast every week. And obviously, Pleb hasn't been here, but couldn't really fill those shoes, I don't think. But I had an absolute blast being here.
No, you've done an outstanding job. So don't sell yourself short. And for all the punters out there, don't you sell yourself short this week. Make sure that you're getting on your trades, going with your gut, and join the Supercoach Hub on Discord as well. You can also find on Facebook, on X, I'll still say Twitter till I die, Insta, and there will be a link also for the server there. The podcast is always up on YouTube, but if you don't like to watch, you can just listen on Spotify as well, so you can find it everywhere. But Barnesy and Vern both wish you the best for round 9. We'll be back with a new podcast next week. I think the Pleb might even be back next week, so it might be the two of us back again for round 10. But until then, good luck with your captaincies, good luck with your trades, and good luck with some NBL basketball this week.
Best of luck, everyone. Enjoy.
And let's stop. Good stuff, mate. It was great. Kept it under an hour too, which is perfect.